The Dark Night of the Soul
by St. John of the Cross. Book 2, Chapter 13. Of other delectable effects which are wrought in the soul by this dark night of contemplation. This type of enkindling will explain to us certain of the delectable effects which this dark night of contemplation works in the soul. For at certain times, as we have just said, the soul becomes enlightened in the midst of all this darkness, and the light shines in the darkness. This mystical intelligence flows down into the understanding, and the will remains in dryness. I mean, without actual union of love. With a serenity and simplicity which are so delicate and delectable to the sense of the soul, that no name can be given to them. Thus the presence of God is felt, now after one manner, now after another. Sometimes, too, as has been said, it wounds the will at the same time, and enkindles love sublimely, tenderly, and strongly. For we have already said that at certain times these two faculties, the understanding and the will, are united, when the more they see, the more perfect and delicate is the purgation of the understanding. But before this state is reached, it is more usual for the touch of the enkindling of love to be felt in the will than for the touch of intelligence to be felt in the understanding. But one question arises here, which is this: why, since these two faculties are being purged together, are the enkindling and the love of purgative contemplation at first more commonly felt in the will than the intelligence thereof is felt in the understanding? To this it may be answered that this passive love does not now directly strike the will, for the will is free, and this enkindling of love is a passion of love rather than the free act of the will. For this heat of love strikes the substance of the soul, and thus moves the affections passively. And so this is called passion of love rather than a free act of the will, an act of the will being so called only in so far as it is free. But these passions and affections subdue the will, and therefore it is said that if the soul conceives passion with a certain affection, the will conceives passion. And this is indeed so, for in this manner the will is taken captive and loses its liberty, according as the impetus and power of its passion carry it away. And therefore we can say that this enkindling of love is in the will, that is, it enkindles the desire of the will, and thus, as we say, this is called passion of love rather than the free work of the will. And because the receptive passion of the understanding can receive intelligence only in a detached and passive way, and this is impossible without its having been purged, therefore, until this happens, the soul feels the touch of intelligence less frequently than that of the passion of love. For it is not necessary to this end that the will should be so completely purged with respect to the passions, since these very passions help it to feel impassioned love. This enkindling and thirst of love, which in this case belongs to the spirit, is very different from that other which we described in writing of the night of sense. For though the sense has also its part here, since it fails not to participate in the labor of the spirit, yet the source and the keenness of the thirst of love is felt in the superior part of the soul, that is, in the spirit. It feels and understands what it feels, and its lack of what it desires, in such a way that all its affliction of sense, although greater without comparison than in the first night of sense, is as nothing to it, because it recognizes within itself the lack of a great good which can in no way be measured. But here we must note that although at the beginning, when this spiritual night commences, this enkindling of love is not felt, because this fire of love has not begun to take a hold, God gives the soul, in place of it, an estimative love of himself, so great that, as we have said, the greatest sufferings and trials of which it is conscious in this night are the anguished thoughts that it has lost God, and the fears that he has abandoned it. And thus we may always say that from the very beginning of this night the soul is touched with yearnings of love, which is now that of estimation, and now again that of enkindling. And it is evident that the greatest suffering which it feels in these trials is this misgiving. For if it could be certified at that time that all is not lost and over, but that what is happening to it is for the best, as it is, and that God is not wroth, it would care nothing for all these afflictions, but would rejoice to know that God is making use of them for his good pleasure. For the love of estimation which it has for God is so great, even though it may not realize this, and may be in darkness, that it would be glad not only to suffer in this way, but even to die many times over, in order to give him satisfaction. But when once the flame has enkindled the soul, it is wont to conceive, together with the estimation that it already has for God, such power and energy, and such yearning for him, when he communicates to it the heat of love, that with great boldness it disregards everything, and ceases to pay respect to anything. Such are the power and inebriation of love and desire. It regards not what it does, for it would do strange and unusual things in whatever way and manner may present themselves, if thereby its soul might find him whom it loves. It was for this reason that Mary Magdalene, though as greatly concerned for her own appearance as she was aforetime, took no heed of the multitude of men who were at the feast, whether they were of little or of great importance. Neither did she consider that it was not seemly, and that it looked ill, to go and weep and shed tears among the guests, providing that, without delaying an hour or waiting for another time and season, she could reach him, for love of whom her soul was already wounded and enkindled. And such is the inebriating power and boldness of love, that though she knew her beloved to be enclosed in the sepulchre by the great sealed stone, and surrounded by soldiers who were guarding him lest his disciples should steal him away, she allowed none of these things to impede her, but went before daybreak with the ointments to anoint him. And finally, this inebriating power and yearning of love caused her to ask one whom she believed to be a gardener, and to have stolen him away from the sepulchre, to tell her, if he had taken him, where he had laid him, that she might take him away. Considering not that such a question, according to independent judgment and reason, was foolish, for it was evident that if the other had stolen him, he would not say so, still less would he allow him to be taken away. It is a characteristic of the power and vehemence of love that all things seem possible to it, and it believes all men to be of the same mind as itself. For it thinks that there is nothing wherein one may be employed, or which one may seek, save that which it seeks itself, and that which it loves. And it believes that there is nothing else to be desired, and nothing wherein it may be employed, save that one thing, which is pursued by all. For this reason, when the bride went out to seek her beloved through streets and squares, thinking that all others were doing the same, she begged them that if they found him, they would speak to him and say that she was pining away for love of him. Such was the power of the love of this Mary, that she thought that if the gardener would tell her where he had hidden him, she would go and take him away, however difficult it might be made for her. Of this manner, then, are the yearnings of love, whereof this soul becomes conscious when it has made some progress in this spiritual purgation. For it rises up by night, that is, in this purgative darkness, according to the affections of the will, and with the yearnings and vehemence of the lioness or the she-bear going to seek her cubs when they have been taken away from her and she finds them not, does this wounded soul go forth to seek its God. For being in darkness, it feels itself to be without him, and to be dying of love for him. And this is that impatient love wherein the soul cannot long subsist without gaining its desire or dying. Such was Rachel's desire for children, when she said to Jacob, "Give me children, else shall I die." But we have now to see how it is that the soul which feels itself so miserable and so unworthy of God, here in this purgative darkness, has nevertheless strength, and is sufficiently bold and daring to journey towards union with God. The reason is that, as love continually gives it strength wherewith it may love indeed, and as the property of love is to desire to be united, joined, and made equal and like to the object of its love, that it may perfect itself in love's good things, hence it comes to pass that when this soul is not perfected in love, through not having as yet attained to union, the hunger and thirst that it has for that which it lacks, which is union, and the strength set by love in the will which has caused it to become impassioned, make it bold and daring by reason of the enkindling of its will, although in its understanding, which is still dark and unenlightened, it feels itself to be unworthy, and knows itself to be miserable. I will not here omit to mention the reason why this divine light, which is always light to the soul, illumines it not as soon as it strikes it, as it does afterwards, but causes it the darkness and trials of which we have spoken. Something has already been said concerning this, but the question must now be answered directly. The darkness and the other evils of which the soul is conscious when this divine light strikes it are not darkness or evils caused by the light, but pertain to the soul itself, and the light illumines it so that it may see them. Wherefore it does indeed receive light from this divine light, but the soul cannot see at first by its aid anything beyond what is nearest to it, or rather beyond what is within it, namely its darknesses and miseries, which it now sees through the mercy of God, and saw not aforetime, because this supernatural light illumined the soul not. And this is the reason why at first it is conscious of nothing beyond darkness and evil. After it has been purged, however, by means of the knowledge and realization of these, it will have eyes to see, by the guidance of this light, the blessings of the divine light. And once all these darknesses and imperfections have been driven out from the soul, it seems that the benefits and the great blessings which the soul is gaining in this blessed night of contemplation become clearer. From what has been said, it is clear that God grants the soul in this state the favor of purging it and healing it with this strong lye, L-Y-E, of bitter purgation, according to its spiritual and its sensual part, of all the imperfect habits and affections which it had within itself with respect to temporal things and to natural, sensual, and spiritual things. Its inward faculties being darkened and voided of all these, its spiritual and sensual affections being constrained and dried up, and its natural energies being attenuated and weakened with respect to all this, a condition which it could never attain of itself, as we shall shortly say. In this way, God makes it to die to all that is not naturally God, so that once it is stripped and denuded of its former skin, he may begin to clothe it anew. And thus its youth is renewed like the eagle's, and it is clothed with the new man, which, as the Apostle says, is created according to God. This is nothing else but his illumination of the understanding with supernatural light, so that it is no more a human understanding, but becomes divine through union with the divine. In the same way the will is informed with divine love, so that it is a will that is now no less than divine, nor does it love otherwise than divinely, for it is made and united in one with the divine will and love. So too is it with the memory, and likewise the affections and desires are all changed and converted divinely, according to God. And thus this soul will now be a soul of heaven, heavenly, and more divine than human. All this, as we have been saying, and because of what we have said, God continues to do and to work in the soul by means of this night, illumining and enkindling it divinely with yearnings for God alone, and for nothing else whatsoever. For which cause the soul then very justly and reasonably adds the third line to the song, which says, "O happy chance, I went forth without being observed." Chapter 14, wherein are set down and explained the last 3 lines of the first stanza. This happy chance was the reason for which the soul speaks in the next lines as follows: "I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest." It takes the metaphor from one who, in order the better to accomplish something, leaves his house by night and in the dark, when those that are in the house are now at rest, so that none may hinder him. For this soul had to go forth to perform a deed so heroic and so rare, namely, to become united with its divine beloved, and it had to leave its house, because the beloved is not found save alone and outside, in solitude. It was for this reason that the bride desired to find him alone, saying, "Who would give thee to me, my brother, that I might find thee alone, outside, and that my love might be communicated to thee?" It is needful for the enamoured soul, in order to attain to its desired end, to do likewise, going forth at night, when all the domestics in its house are sleeping and at rest, that is, when the low operations, passions, and desires of the soul, who are the people of the household, are, because it is night, sleeping and at rest. When these are awake, they invariably hinder the soul from seeking its good, since they are opposed to its going forth in freedom. These are they of whom our Saviour speaks in the Gospel, saying that they are the enemies of man. And thus it would be meet that their operations and motions should be put to sleep in the night, to the end that they may not hinder the soul from attaining the supernatural blessings of the union of love of God. For while these are alive and active, this cannot be. For all their work and their natural motions hinder rather than aid the soul's reception of the spiritual blessings of the union of love, inasmuch as all natural ability is impotent with respect to the supernatural blessings that God, by means of his own infusion, bestows upon the soul passively, secretly, and in silence. And thus it is needful that all the faculties should receive this infusion, and that in order to receive it they should remain passive, and not interpose their own base acts and vile inclinations. It was a happy chance for this soul that on this night God should put to sleep all the domestics in its house, that is, all the faculties, passions, affections, and desires which live in the soul, both sensually and spiritually. For thus it went forth without being observed, that is, without being hindered by these affections, etc., for they were put to sleep and mortified in this night, in the darkness of which they were left, that they might not notice or feel anything after their own low and natural manner, and might thus be unable to hinder the soul from going forth from itself and from the house of its sensuality. And thus only could the soul attain to the spiritual union of perfect love of God. Oh, how happy a chance is this for the soul which can free itself from the house of its sensuality. None can understand it, unless, as it seems to me, it be the soul that has experienced it. For such a soul will see clearly how wretched was the servitude in which it lay, and to how many miseries it was subject when it was at the mercy of its faculties and desires, and will know how the life of the spirit is true liberty and wealth, bringing with it inestimable blessings. Some of these we shall point out as we proceed in the following stanzas, wherein it will be seen more clearly what good reason the soul has to sing of the happy chance of its passage from this dreadful night which has been described above. End of chapter 13 and 14.